Hi everyone. We are Johnny and Roberta from Synchronicity Center from Modern Mindfulness and Awakening, and we'd like to welcome you to episode 1 of Introduction to Practical Buddhism and Mindfulness Meditation. This series is intended to give you an easy-to-understand overview of core Buddhist philosophy and provide you with simple tools to apply it to your daily modern life.
So today we are going to talk about a brief history of the Buddha and some commonly misunderstood concepts. Now, being our first episode of this new and enlightening series, if you could please like and subscribe to our channel, follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and if you are at all able to help support the work that we are doing with Synchronicity Center, as we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, please consider making a small donation through our website at synchronicitycenter.org. So let's get started.
So, who was this figure that most all of us know as the Buddha? Was he a jolly old chubby man in robes that people keep statues of in their living room and rub his belly for good luck at restaurants? Or was he a god? Maybe even a creator god that millions of people now worship all over the world? Well, in actuality, according to historical documentation and early Buddhist texts and scripture, he was none of those things. In fact, the Buddha was just a regular human being.
The Buddha's given name was Siddhartha Gautama. It is believed that he was born in an area of far north in India called Lumbini, which is now known as modern-day Nepal. And he came into this world around 2,600 years ago. Now, in most cases, when people refer to the Buddha, this is the person that they are talking about. Even though, over the course of history, there have been many Buddhas, including the chubby Buddha that Johnny mentioned just before. Now, that Buddha was in fact a Chinese monk, and he was named Budai, who became known as the Laughing Buddha, or even more affectionately as the Fat Buddha. And he is commonly revered in Chinese culture.
Probably more important to understand that Buddha is actually a title. It is one that Siddhartha was given after he embarked on a spiritual quest and through his own efforts attained what we would call enlightenment. The word Buddha is derived from the Pali and Sanskrit words meaning awakened one.
So, after his profound realizations and understanding of reality, the Buddha went on to teach his wisdom to others. His teachings became the core to what we now call Buddhism.
And over time, they evolved into a philosophical system that required no belief, but rather was intended to be studied and practiced. Even so, many years after his death, as evolution took its natural course and political and cultural influences played their part, the basis of his teachings branched off into many different sects and schools, and eventually became a world religion.
Now, it is important to be noted, however, that the Buddha himself never claimed to be or was considered to be a god. And there are many instances within many Buddhist texts where he himself actually advised against worshiping idols. Now, this is obviously a very commonly misunderstood fact, especially to many Westerners.
The Buddha was, in actuality, a highly respected and revered teacher who dedicated his life to teaching and helping others along the same path he had discovered to enlightenment.
Well, then why, you might ask, do I see people bowing before or actually prostrating themselves in front of images or statues of the Buddha? And why are there so many temples with so many monks, nuns, and rules? Well, as far as regular community lay people are concerned, Even though you may see them bowing before or prostrating themselves a number of times in front of a statue or image of the Buddha, they are not necessarily praying to him or even expressing a form of worship. In essence, what they are doing is what we would describe as paying homage to the Buddha, or in other words, making a physical expression of respect and their intention to follow the Buddha's teachings in order to traverse his same path to enlightenment.
However, it is important to be pointed out that over time, the various schools of Buddhism that developed in various parts of the world all kind of added their own cultural or political flavor, so to speak. There are some that did evolve to almost deify and worship him. And there are even some traditions and cultural practices in certain parts of the world that eventually developed and do describe the Buddha as a type of God, but not a creator God like most of us think of in Judeo-Christian or Islamic traditions. While at the same time, many other traditions and schools just continue to hold him in the highest regard, respecting him and his teachings as the ultimate path to awakening.
Exactly. And as far as all of those temples, monks, and nuns, just to briefly touch on that, after the Buddha's enlightenment, he so generously shared his newly discovered wisdom with the people all around him, which it didn't take long to develop a community of other spiritual seekers. Many of these people were so taken by his teachings and newfound wisdom, along with his new perspective. In addition, it was said that many people were just so enamored or enchanted and drawn to his calm and peaceful demeanor that they actually renounced their former lifestyles to become disciples of the Buddha. Many even went so far as to take monastic vows and accompany him on his travels.
Well, eventually this grew to a large community of monastics known as bhikkhus, and construction of eventual groves and villages where the bhikkhus traveled to and from with the Buddha, supporting and spreading their spiritual teachings to the lay community and even other royal kingdoms of the time.
So they followed what developed to be a very strict monastic code, with many, many training rules that were added slowly over time, but they were all aimed at maintaining a safe and harmonious community and with the ideal of progressing each other on the path to total enlightenment. Now we'll get into a bit more detail on that later, and how the monastic practice of Buddhism differs from that of the householder or layperson.
So how did this all happen to a regular guy like Siddhartha? Though a lot of what we traditionally know about his life has been passed down over the ages, as there was no written history until around 500 years after the Buddha's death, there is still a lot we can know about his life from the teachings and stories that have been passed down.
Now, probably the most well-known traditional story is that Siddhartha Gautama was born into the Shakyamuni clan, and he was actually far from just a regular guy. He was actually the crowned prince of his kingdom of Magadha. He lived a very scholarly, educated, artistic, affluent, and luxurious life, yet was quite sheltered within his palace walls. It was said that his parents did not want to expose him to any of the realities of ugliness, pain, and suffering in the outside world, as they truly believed him to be destined to become a great king to their people, and they wanted him to be shielded from these things. Talk about overprotective parents.
But as he grew up in his protected paradise, he eventually married a young, intelligent, and compassionate woman named Yasodhara, and they had a son together named Rahula. All seemed pretty normal in the course of a would-be king's life, when he reached about the age of 29. He was just seemingly doing what princes do when one day everything changed.
So the story goes that while on a carriage ride with his wife and loyal servant Chana, that he had, for the very first time, insisted on voyaging outside his palace walls. He experienced his first real-world encounters with old age, sickness, and death. Now, while just on this short ride, along the side of the road, he encountered a very elderly, crippled man, a person suffering from illness that could surely not be helped by the prince's affluence alone. And then finally, the corpse of another man that had already succumbed to sickness or old age, just lying there on the side of the road he traveled.
Now, having never left the safety of his storybook palace walls, these encounters were obviously very troubling to him. He had a moment of realization at this point that his wealth, education, and social status would not do anything to protect him from these inevitable realities of suffering and mortality.
And one last encounter he had along this famed, life-altering carriage ride was with a wandering mendicant. Now, this mendicant, was a spiritual-seeking monk who begged and relied on charitable donations of food from others while on his quest for spirituality. And what was impressive to Siddhartha about this man was just how calm, peaceful, and serene he was. Though he had nothing, he did not seem to be bothered and troubled the way that Siddhartha now felt internally, with his newfound realizations of the ugly and unavoidable truths of reality.
This man inspired Siddhartha to become a spiritual seeker himself, and attempt to garner the wisdom needed in order to ease his newly realized uneasiness about the unforgiving and unavoidable realities of life. The story goes on much further, but ultimately Siddhartha eventually renounced his life as a prince, and under the cover of night, he left the palace and his family and began his quest for inner peace.
Now, throughout his 6-year journey, he did everything from wandering on his own through the forests to working with several different gurus and teachers. He spent long periods of time meditating, and there were times he even practiced extreme forms of self-discipline and asceticism, and at one point he even almost starved himself to death. He was a devoted student, but nearing the end of those 6 years, it was said that he felt frustrated, that he still wasn't getting the answers to his questions, or gaining the type of wisdom and peace that he was seeking. He eventually discovered that the path to this peace was to be found through his own mental discipline. So, what came to be a famous site in northern India, he sat in formal meditation under a large type of fig tree known as a pipal or bo tree. It was said that he meditated under that tree for 7 straight days, where he grappled with his own mind, analyzing the concepts and ideas that were seemingly preventing him from seeing reality clearly.
And the story goes that after 7 days, he suddenly understood and had the realization that he was the source of his own discomfort and suffering, as well as the source of the peace, joy, and contentment that he was so desperately searching for. Upon realizing that the truths and wisdom he had been looking for all along could be found inside himself rather than outside himself, he was awakened, or enlightened.
He realized that neither his experiences of the extravagances of luxury and comfort, or even harsh circumstances or self-deprivation led to these answers. What he found was that the answers were to be found in a middle way.
So after his enlightenment, Siddhartha would eventually come to be known as the Buddha, as we mentioned from the Pali and Sanskrit words meaning awakened, in the site where he sat under that tree known as Bodh Gaya, and even that very tree known as the Bodhi tree in his honor.
So as we mentioned before, he went on to teach others his newfound realizations and wisdom, and he developed a community of disciples, monastics, and lay people, which became known as the Sangha. All of his teachings held collectively became known as the Dhamma, or Dharma in the Pali or Sanskrit language. And we'll get into much more detail about this in another video in the series, but the two main ideas that the Buddha's teachings are centered on are the problem of human suffering and the methods that can bring about a cessation of that suffering.
What's important to be noted is that the Buddha taught a method of living that was intended to be practiced. He never presented his teachings as a set of beliefs that he asked his followers to just take on faith and believe, just because he said so. He would often say things along the lines of, "Don't believe me because I say it. Practice it, and you will see for yourself."
Ultimately, his teachings ask us to look inward and study what's going on in our own minds. And by doing this, we are able to gain a clearer understanding of ourselves and the true nature of reality.
And that's the really wonderful thing about Buddhist philosophy and practice. You don't have to become a religious Buddhist to benefit from the teachings. It is totally compatible with anyone's faith, non-faith, or belief system.
Now, we'll wrap up this episode in just a moment, but we do want to just briefly explain the significance of the three jewels, also known as the triple gem in Buddhism. Now, when someone makes the decision to follow the path and teachings of the Buddha in a formal way, they may do what is called taking refuge. And this also means seeking shelter. So they take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. They take refuge in the Buddha because he was just a regular person that became perfectly self-enlightened. So if he could do it, anyone could. They take refuge in the Dhamma, which of course are all of the teachings that the Buddha gave to help point you in the direction of getting there. And they take refuge in the Sangha as their supportive community of other practitioners.
So we hope you learned something new in this very first episode. Keep an eye out for episode 2 very soon. Feel free to post any questions in the comments, and we will try to answer those questions in a subsequent episode.
Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And check out our website, synchronicitycenter.org, to see all of the cool things that we are up to.
And while you're there, if it is within your means, please feel free to contribute a small tax-deductible donation via PayPal or even easily on our Facebook links, as it will truly help us to produce more content like this in the future and support all of the other work we are doing.
But for now, until next time, we will leave you with our own metta, or loving kindness wishes for the day. May you all be happy. May you all be well. May you all be safe and free from suffering this day and every day.
Thank you.